welcome to Sacred Justice, a podcast that features discourse rooted in the pursuit of justice as sacred practice. Our weekly discussions reflect on current events, art, media, theology, and how they intersect with the movements for freedom and liberation. We hope that through these conversations, we can foster inclusivity by expanding our learning opportunities. We hope to cultivate digital community beyond the confines of our campus. And we hope to reconnect the church's social and spiritual callings. Join us for the journey. Hello, friends. Welcome back to Sacred Justice. I am Mia McLean, and I am here with
Ben Boswell.
And we are talking about a lot today. So there is so much happening in our world. So this episode is going to touch on a bunch of different things that are all connected to one theme. A lot of current events that are dealing with racism, critical race theory, white backlash, the empire striking back. All of these things are happening at one time. And so we needed to dedicate a whole episode to just current events, to really sit with what's going on in our society and what that has to do with our sacred call to be people of justice and repairers of the breach. Ben, how are you doing today?
I'm good. There's a lot going on today, a lot going on in our world. And so it's sorting it all out is quite challenging. And it just feels like one thing happens and then another.
Yeah. Every the news cycle, in which when we get more into the conversation, the news cycle is happening so quickly. And particularly as I was tweeting about the Olympics and I was counting all of the different things that were happening related to the Olympics in a 2-week span, it's just been so much news and not good news either, just one terrible thing after the next. So we'll get into that. But we're going to start off with jump right into our current events. So critical race theory, Ben. Now we're going to start here because it's related to the thing that we're going to follow up after this with Nikole Hannah-Jones. Ben, I have not heard this term so much in a short period of time. I am so tired of hearing critical race theory. I'm hearing people talk about it, type about it. People who don't know what they're talking about, talk about it.
Of course they don't know what they're talking about.
It's mind-boggling. And I haven't really fully wrapped my head around what it is. I think that on a very surface level, I understand what it isn't. I understand that it's a deeper form of theory that you wouldn't necessarily cover explicitly in a regular college class, right? Or a elementary school class. So all of these people who are upset about their children getting critical race theory, what are they even talking about? You wouldn't get that in kindergarten. But can you give us an overview as a scholar on what critical race theory is?
Well, first, I think your question about how you're hearing about it so much and you weren't hearing about it at all, and the radical increase in you hearing about it, we have to start there. And this is going to be, for a lot of folks, an education in how politics works in America, how propaganda works in America. And so there was a religious kind of a fringe, not very well-known fringe religious person, and who writes in very hard right conservative areas, that published an article on a university site, not even in like the New York Times or somewhere popular, but in a university site, where he made the argument that critical race theory, and linked it to people like Ibram Kendi and Robin DiAngelo and others, was infiltrating our public schools and was basically ruining children's lives and creating anti-American sentiment, all the things we're hearing now. Well, someone who works for Tucker Carlson had this person on, found this article and brought this person on their show. And after that, from before that moment, no one in America was talking about critical race theory, except for a few legal scholars. After Tucker Carlson started this game by bringing this person on, suddenly now critical race theory is one of the most quoted things in anywhere in America, and it's just overboard. And it's gotten to the point now where many states are putting laws in place that forbid the teaching of critical race theory, even though they don't know what they're talking about. So they're now forbidding the teaching of things, and they don't understand what they're forbidding. Places like Oklahoma, Alabama, the typical southern states, of course, but even places like Virginia, like in Loudoun County, I would just encourage everyone to go on and Google Loudoun County School Board meeting. And if you're not a white person that's embarrassed after that, then you're not paying attention. The way that people act in that meeting is so despicable and embarrassing and pathetic, it makes you doubt your faith in humanity. So all this fever pitch around critical race theory is a concerted, intentional political effort to scare the American public into thinking that something is being taught to their children that is hurting the children and hurting America, which is all a lie. All of it is a total lie. It's completely fabricated and untrue. Critical race theory actually doesn't have anything, has very little to do with Robin DiAngelo and Ibram Kendi. Critical race theory, Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw, legal scholars, developed a way of thinking about how racism and the effects of slavery continue to impact the legal system in America. So there's a famous book called Critical Race Theory that is a compendium of articles written by 40 legal scholars, edited by Kimberly Crenshaw. I might have it somewhere. That is sort of the foundational text, and that is taught in law schools. It is not taught in any public school education system in America. It never has been. So this McCarthy scare around this red scare around critical race theory is completely misplaced. And the truth is that critical race theory is simply just trying to help us understand the ways systemic racism continues to impact law, economics, and politics in America, which is obvious and true. It also has a very critical way of reading history, in a way that we don't often read history. So all that to be said, I think we're in a moment where this is a specific targeted effort by people on the right, especially media folks on the right, like Tucker Carlson and others. Because, by the way, it's now gotten to the point where congressmen and representatives are emailing their constituents here in Charlotte about critical race theory, saying, can you believe what they said? And, they brought Ibram Kendi to talk at Charlotte Mecklenburg Public Schools, and people freaked out because they think he has something to do with critical race theory. Ibram Kendi is not a critical race theory scholar.
No, every black person that's talking about black stuff in America is not a critical race.
They're not a critical race theory scholar. Yeah, people don't understand who critical race theory scholars are. I saw today that in somewhere, I think Oklahoma or somewhere, they're banning books from public schools, libraries, if they think they have something to do with critical race theory. And one of them that they're banning was a book about Ruby Bridges by Ruby Bridges. Now, Ruby Bridges integrated before critical race theory was invented.
Yeah.
And so the idea that so what that reveals is that this is about anything related to Black advancement.
Yeah.
And an honest discussion of American history, systemic racism, or white supremacy. This is an attempt to take every conversation about that topic and make it seem anti-American and dangerous. Yeah. And so I think that we need to see this fever-pitched conversation about critical race theory as a part of white backlash, and not only a part of just one aspect of white backlash, but as a nationwide cultural phenomenon that is related to the election and the removal of Donald Trump from office.
Yeah.
This is what's happened. The first white backlash was that of this year was the insurrection on January 6th. That was the first radical white backlash event. And since then, because that was, of course, over the top, the move has now been, instead of trying to change the laws or turn over the results of the election, which was the first attempt, or take over the Capitol and kill Mike Pence, now the attempt is to change public opinion so radically back to the right that Democrats or folks in the middle, moderate or left who are trying to do anti-racist work can't continue to advance the conversation around things like reparations, the George Floyd criminal justice reform bill, voting rights. I could go on and on. The filibuster, the Supreme Court, infrastructure, all of these things that are up for conversation right now and have the chance of helping change America into the country we want it to be. All of those are worrisome to those on the right. And the other thing is, how do you position yourself once you have aligned yourself with Donald Trump and he has then been not reelected, and then there was an insurrection that embarrassed a whole group of Trump supporters. I say embarrassed. I hope that people are embarrassed about that.
Yeah.
And then there was no congressionally approved bipartisan commission. They fought against that, and so we've not had a blue ribbon commission to find out what really happened and to hold anybody accountable for that, including the politicians and the Congress leaders who were tweeting from inside the Capitol, telling people where to go and what to do.
Yeah.
And so because that was never dealt with, that is leading this effort of changing public opinion, because if we can do that, then they know what to run on in 2020. See, all these people are up for re-election. So they've got to figure out a way if they're going to maintain their connection to Trump, because they have to maintain their base. How are they going to convince other people to vote for them that see the Trump thing as embarrassing?
Yeah.
Then they have to find to connect it to a larger effort, this sort of McCarthy idea, this ideology that somehow critical race theory is destroying America, and what they're going to do is pinpoint all the come out against critical race theory. That I bet you the 2022 elections, every conversation is about that.
You broke up for a second, Ben. What are they going to pinpoint?
I think that that in 2022, this is what a lot of politicians are going to run their campaign on.
Yes.
Because how else do you say, I've been loyal to Donald Trump, I still believe in Donald Trump, and get moderates and other people to vote for you? Right. The only way to do that is to say, there's this concerted effort of anti-American sentiment that we need to be opposed to. And my opponent, the Democrat, is for critical race theory in your schools, is for brainwashing your children, is for destroying their lives, and therefore you should vote for me. And that's what everybody's going to run on. So I see this as a part. This white backlash is a concerted political effort to redeem the image of the Republican Party.
Yes. And so now we're seeing how this white backlash is spilling over into real decision making, right? So we're seeing this issue now as we transition to the original denial of tenure of Nikole Hannah-Jones.
Yes.
For those who don't know, Nikole Hannah-Jones is a journalist. She's been in journalism for many years, 20 or 30 years. She's worked for the New York Times. Some of you are familiar with her work, the 1619 Project that came out in 2019, that was exploring the 400 years since the first African descendants were brought to Jamestown or were brought to the shore, at least the ones that were recorded. And so this whole thing about critical race theory has affected how she was supposed to be added as a faculty of this very prestigious journalism school at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which is her alma mater, and also where the organization, the society, the Ida B. Wells Society that she founded is located. She was denied tenure all connected to some fear of critical race theory isms. And she is not a critical race theorist. She is a journalist. And there
Right.
are people, black and white, who do not care for the 1619 Project, but who, have followed her work for a while as a journalist and have been just absolutely appalled. Not surprised, but appalled. I want to talk about how these things are connected. Now,
Yeah.
she did make a statement, and I do want to read a quote that she made her official statement that she had after they. We'll go back into the history of this thing. They eventually came back around and offered her tenure in which she denied, and now she is starting a journalism program at Howard University in D.C., which is a historically black university,
With
and
Ta-Nehisi Coates.
with Ta-Nehisi Coates. And she says that she goes, I've been trying to prove myself in predominantly white, historically white institutions my entire life. I don't have anything else to prove. The burden to change systems cannot always be on the people who are being excluded from those systems.
Mm. Mm-mm-mm. Amen.
Oh, so for those
You
of you,
could say that about the church. You could say that about the university. You could say that about the government, the
you
law.
can so much. You can say it about so much. We were just having this conversation and talk back on Sunday with Reverend Tara Gibbs about somebody had asked a question about what do people who have been marginalized from the church or from institutions do? Do they stay and they make change, or do they go and start something new? And
Mm.
this is a prime example of somebody who was like, I'm tired of y'all. I'm tired of trying to make change. All of your critical theory, fear, phobia, or whatever's going on there, right? The way that power is working in these institutions, the white backlash that is present in these institutions, you know, they lost a excellent person and who's going to make something new because
Absolutely.
she's done. She's done.
I mean, I think this is one. It reminds me of the Thomas Merton quote from the book Seeds of Destruction that he wrote, in which contains an article called "The Letters to the White Liberals," and he says to white liberals, himself included, that the Black Civil Rights Movement, the Black Freedom Movement, is reaching out its hand and offering white people salvation from the evil that they have brought upon themselves and the world, and that white people continue to refuse that offer of salvation. That's what movements for justice are. They're the offer of salvation to both oppressed and oppressor. It is both liberation for Moses and Moses' people and for Pharaoh, if Pharaoh would open Pharaoh's eyes and see it. But
Yeah.
Pharaoh doesn't open Pharaoh's eye. Pharaoh hardens Pharaoh's heart. And that's what white people keep doing. We harden our hearts when we see the movement instead of opening our eyes and opening our hearts for the salvation that's being offered. And so here, Nikole Hannah-Jones, Lord knows UNC Chapel Hill needed salvation. God knows. As a Duke grad, I can say that so many different ways. The Duke needs salvation too. I'm not saying that they're both, that one's better than the other. I'm just saying that Lord knows these schools on Tobacco Road in North Carolina, with the history and legacy of slavery in both cases, Duke and Chapel Hill, they are in desperate need of salvation that is being offered to them by Nikole Hannah-Jones, and they continue to turn it down.
Yeah.
In this case, it's a lot of white, wealthy trustees.
Yes. So wealth and whiteness are at play in this.
Absolutely. And so the white, wealthy trustees start getting calls from other white, wealthy trustees saying, this is the 1619 Project, woman? Well, I just heard on Tucker Carlson that, critical race theory is the enemy, and therefore I'm going to call you and tell you I'm withholding my gift to UNC Chapel Hill this year unless you deny this woman tenure, yada, yada. That's how it goes down.
Yeah.
And in fact, the head of the trustees has said such. He said that he himself was concerned about the 1619 Project, and even more concerned about an article she wrote on reparation. Wouldn't you be surprised by that? Now, why would a wealthy white person be concerned about reparation? Lots to consider there. But what's at stake, of course, is truth, the future of journalism, journalistic integrity, history. And then if you connect that with this just running back into denial as a part of white backlash that is happening in America right now, you see it. I see them as all part of the same thing. I want to just trace historically quickly, Mia, if you allow me. Will you allow me?
You're allowed.
Trace historically. after the Emancipation Proclamation and the Civil War was lost by Confederacy, I hope you heard that, Confederates, you lost. Um, there was a concerted effort of white backlash in two forms. One, the rise of white supremacy vigilantes in the form of the KKK, which was born at that moment, and in lost cause ideology, which tried to redeem and polish and valorize the soldiers who fought for to maintain slavery. I don't even want to call them Confederates. Soldiers who fought to maintain Black oppression were then valorized, some of whom ended up then fighting in America's imperial wars, retaining their rank, and fighting in America's imperial wars in the Philippines, Guam, Hawaii, et cetera, all over the world against other poor, people of color. So the racism didn't go anywhere. So this concerted effort. So that's what happened after the Civil War. And so we have the birth of a nation. We have Woodrow Wilson playing that in the office. We have white supremacy in Charlotte and everywhere in the front page of the newspaper. We have think about the time frame of Tulsa. Think about the time frame of the Wilmington Massacre. Think about the time frame of the St. Louis Massacre in 1917. All of those massacres, they were not race riots, massacres that happened at those times were a concerted effort of white backlash, right? And in terms of just blatant white supremacy, they just came out and said, Black people are trying to take over power. White people are superior. We're gonna hurt them. We're gonna oppress them, etc. The same thing happened after the Civil Rights Movement. The same thing happened. And what would white backlash look like then? First of all, assassination of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., Fred Hampton, Medgar Evers, Bobby Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, on and on and on. But also the FBI itself, our own government, backlashing against all Black freedom movements, having a file on Martin Luther King Jr. and targeting him and his family, killing Fred Hampton, just on and on, oppressing and fighting against the Black Panther movement, jailing Black Panther leaders. And then I would say the moral majority and what then became neoliberalism were also backlash movements against the Black freedom movement. Mm-hmm. Using economics as a way to shut it down. So now we're in the same moment. There was some advancement in the turning away from Donald Trump and the election of a Democratic president. And what happened immediately? Not even the day of the inauguration, but white backlash started. And we've had it all year long, from the inauguration all the way up until now. And it's come in all these different forms. So it's the insurrection, it's Nikole Hannah-Jones, it's critical race theory, it's the attacks on voting rights, and it's a concerted effort of white people fighting to maintain power. And here's the thing, Mia, that's so interesting. We are in that limbo period between the presidency of Donald Trump and 2050, when America will be a dominant, will be no longer a white dominant country. That's why this period is so crazy, is because white people know we are coming to a moment where we will no longer have power. So in the middle, what will we do when we no longer have power? And in our existential fear of that, we are reacting violently against the any kind of advancement for people of color in our country, especially Black people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, one of the things that I've been sitting with Nikole, really, Nikole Hannah-Jones, really has to do with, she seemed to be really hurt by this. Like when you watch that interview with Gail, what is Gail's last name? Gail.
Yeah, I don't know. I know who you're talking about.
I just can't. It left my mind. Oprah's best friend, Gail. When she's in this interview with Gail, she says, I didn't really ask for this. She was really excited about the opportunity to go back to her alma mater and to affect change. And one of the things that I'm starting to see with colleagues and some peers is that the people are tired. So what is this country going to look like when we all start to divest from these institutions, including churches, right? People, when the marginalized get fed up with the church and they go somewhere and make their own place, what is that really going to look like when there's going to be this mass divestment? There's already this move towards, we're leaving there's been somebody else who has resigned from UNC Chapel Hill, I believe. There's been a couple of Black professors that have resigned from other institutions and are going to HBCUs. What is this going to really mean for the country when people start to say, we don't want your money anymore, we don't want we don't want your prestige, we don't want your handouts? I'm just curious about what that's going to look like, even in terms of the church.
Oh man, I think the only experience I have with something that radical is my own alma mater, Duke Divinity School. And we had an event, what we call now, in hindsight, we call it the Blacksit. You know, you have Brexit, we had the Blacksit. And this was a time where, when I was in school, Dr. Willie James Jennings, who's now at Yale, Dr. Ebony Marshall Turman, who is also now at Yale, Dr. J. Cameron Carter, who is now at Indiana University, Reverend Dr. Tiffany Marley. There are many, I could go on, who were on faculty, an incredibly diverse, and probably now many of those are considered the top Christian theologians in the world, not just Black scholars, but the top Christian theologians in the world, and were so fed up by continuing to be denied tenure, continuing to be passed over for being named as dean. Willie Jennings should have been the dean of the whole divinity school at Duke. And probably there were times when he wanted to be. He was assistant dean. And that they left. And when they left Duke in peril. They left our divinity school in peril. They left it from a moment where it was probably one of the highest rated divinity schools in the country. And then in the next 10-year period becoming almost unrecognizable. And the scholarship declining and the faculty struggling and presidents coming and going and a lack of understanding of its identity in the world and what it should do. And this really resulted in people who were already on faculty. These were not even like a denied tenure on their way in, Mia. These were folks who had invested in students, who'd cared for, who taught, who'd cared for the organization and institution, and were treated with such disrespect and disdain over a period of time that they just got fed up and left. And I have to say personally, I'll just confess that I feel like I was a part of this. I did not have a full understanding of who the Black faculty were on campus and what they meant in the world to me. I didn't have a full understanding. I found myself continuing to chase the same white scholars around for their classes and not investing. I remember arguing with J. Cameron Carter about his book like I knew what the hell I was talking about, and I didn't. There's an arrogance there among the white students that I was a part of. And I look at that now and I say, is that a cautionary tale for the church? Is that a cautionary tale for America?
Yeah.
And for all universities?
Yeah.
You can't bend to white backlash. This is what we have learned through American history. You cannot bend. When the white backlash begins, you have to become stronger and more resolute than ever.
Yeah.
Because it is a wave. It is a tidal wave. And the other thing is, I think people right now, they look at critical race theory and Nikole Hannah-Jones and voting rights, and they're sitting from their ivory tower or in their safe suburban communities, and they're thinking those are not problems that affect them. Those are not big deal problems. But that's how white people thought also during the time of the KKK's birth and when the FBI was going after the Black Freedom Movement. These moments of white backlash, on the surface, they seem like they're insignificant or just a part and parcel of what it means to be American, or as if they're not relevant to our lives. But I see us in a moment of radical danger. I feel like we're in one of the most dangerous moments in American history. You've got this white backlash in a time of a pandemic that's not done with us.
Yeah.
It's not done with us.
Yeah.
And then you've got some elections coming up. The 45th president of the United States has not gone away.
Nope.
We are in a real moment. That we thought we were flirting with fascism before. We might be flirting. This critical race theory thing, that's about as fascist as it gets. I mean, when I say McCarthy, I'm not joking, right? This is like, we're going to fire you as a teacher if you teach critical race theory. We're not going to make you be able to say the words or read about Ruby Bridges. We're just going to eliminate certain forms of history.
Yeah.
Fascism.
Yeah. And it spills over into other systems of injustice. So we know that this is all connected. So yes, critical race theory, blah, 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 racism, and also gender injustice, sex injustice. By sex, I don't mean like the act of sex. I mean your actual sexual identity, right? Your gender identity injustice. And so one of the things that I have been looking at in terms of all of this conversation is the Olympics.
Hmm.
And I'm a huge Olympic fan. I have been for my entire life, particularly the Summer Olympics. I like track and field. I like gymnastics,
Mm-hmm.
women's gymnastics, women's track and field in particular.
Yeah.
And I got to admit to you, 8 years ago, I wasn't woke like this. 4 years ago, did I watch it 4 years ago? Perhaps I wasn't woke in the way that I am woke, or 5 years ago, really, because that was 2016.
Yeah.
I had not awakened to how unjust the Olympics actually are for Black women folk, for transgender folk, for intersex folk, for non-binary folk. It wasn't until this year that I started over the last 2 weeks compiling a list of all of the news headlines that were attacking Black women identified folk, starting with CeCe Telfer, who is a Jamaican American transgender woman track star who was banned from participating because she is transgender. And they said that she could not compete in women's sports. She can compete in men's sports, though. And they cited testosterone issues. Then there was this article that said they were banning swim caps that were made exclusively for African American hair or natural Afro descendant hair, because we need special swim caps to protect our hair. Then they came out with banning, the Sha'Carri Richardson was banned for the marijuana situation. She had apparently tested positive, and we know how the war on drugs has been for Black bodies in this country. And we also know that marijuana is legal in many states. Now, people will argue that the Olympic rules state such and such, right? And then there was the banning of 2 Namibian women whose testosterone levels were too high. And these, from what I understand, are cisgender women. They're not transgender, they're not intersex. Then there was the banning of Carter Semenya, who is an intersex South African black woman who could not run, intersex. And so I'm hearing all these headlines. They're all affecting Black women identified folk. They're all affecting, they're dealing with issues of gender, particularly with women. And so I went on this rant on Twitter and it blew up, and that was terrible. Never go viral. But I've just been sitting with how all of this stuff is intersecting, and what does white backlash have to do with this?
Mm-hmm. Well, in this case, I'm not. It's there's certainly some white backlash here, but I feel like a lot of the issues that you're speaking to are structural, and systemic issues. The issue related to drugs is one that we love to talk about in terms of personal responsibility and all this stuff, but in reality, we know that is the fact that there are more people in jail for marijuana offenses than there are for opioid offenses betrays our racist system, or that there are more people in jail for marijuana than there are for those who created the economic crisis of 2008, which defrauded so many Americans and took so much money away, hurt so many people. It's a betrayal of what do we value? Why are we prosecuting people for marijuana, recreational marijuana, or even drug dealing marijuana in relationship, and not for opioids? So there's this systemic issues here that we have to wrestle with. It's like the difference between cocaine and crack in the 80s, right? And how those were prosecuted. Not to mention the fact that both of those have roots in our government trading drugs for weapons in Nicaragua. Come on now. We've got a history here with drugs that, and the opioid thing, we just let off scot-free, the company and the family, that they're going to be allowed to declare bankruptcy and skate away from this mess that they're responsible for. It's just, there's so much related to drugs and pharmaceuticals that is unjust and structurally and systemically racist. And then, I mean, when you start thinking about the caps, that one is just so stupid to me. I mean, there's no way that a cap is going to give you an advantage in
Mm-hmm.
pool. And that one just seems like a blatant form of oppression and misunderstanding of the difference of black hair and white hair, right? So there's an insensitivity that then becomes and a lack of understanding that then becomes discrimination.
Yeah.
And then with the gender issues, I mean, this is an issue for sports, I think, across the board.
Yeah. It needs to be a conversation.
And here's the thing is, maybe instead of just banning people, you could ask the other female athletes if they're afraid of competing against someone who identifies differently in as a female. Or maybe you could just come up with have a conversation about this, for instance, because I think this is the fear is that somehow competition is not equitable, right?
Yeah.
And that's crazy.
Well, yes, and what is this obsession with testosterone? Particularly because they're not testing in the other direction. So they're testing women identified folk. And one of our church members, Bethany Johnson, said that the testosterone testing is an improvement from the 90s when they used to actually do genital examinations.
What?
Yes, for mostly female identified or woman identified athletes had to undergo genital examinations.
I mean, the oppression here is obvious, right? Because there are people, and it's a larger percentage than most of us are willing to admit, that are born intersex.
Yes.
And then are often forced by their parents or their doctors to make a choice when, in fact, they are not one way or the other, but 50-50, make a choice to deny 50% of their humanity,
right,
to choose a gender, even though they are non-binary at birth. And then that leads to all kinds of dysphoria later in life, where they chose the wrong direction, or because they chose one over the other, they're feeling they identify as the one that they don't get to live out. I mean, it's a whole oppressive matrix here. Yeah. And but from the very beginning, by forcing either using genitalia or testosterone, you're already deciding that a certain segment of the population who are born legitimately as intersex could never compete in one place or the other.
Right. And so I just think this needs to be a conversation that is held for pro sports in general, and the exclusion of particularly transgender, intersex, and non-binary and cisgender women who have testosterone levels that are higher than what is permitted, for whatever that means, needs to be a conversation. And it seems like, and I could be wrong about this, so Bethany Johnson, I'm going to have her on the podcast to explicate this for me, but it seems like it is a racial issue because a lot of the people whose testosterone levels are higher than what they are supposed to be are people of African descent. And so what is that saying about the harshness of this system? Yeah.
Right. And that it always falls more heavily on people of color, right? Yeah. And countries in the Southern Hemisphere, for instance.
Yeah.
You don't see all this mess happening with Eastern European gymnasts. You don't see this. And so I think, it's amazing. It really is amazing when you start to peel back the layers of how many parts of our society, including even just professional sports and questions of testosterone, are still tied to the history and legacy of not only racial oppression, but gender oppression, patriarchy.
Yeah. And so finally, for our episode on current events, what about voting rights? We're heading into 2022, which will be a mid-election year for many people. And there seems to be a lot of talk about, are we going to be in the same position we were in 2018 in Atlanta? Are we in the same position we were in 2020? What is happening with voting rights and white backlash around this?
Well, how do you, again, sometimes when I talk about these subjects, it's like it's so basic that it's not even worth talking about. And it gets frustrating. I'm sure if it's frustrating for me, it must be just like overwhelming for you, Mia. But like, I'm just like, why do we have to point out that voting rights, voting restrictions, voter suppression laws are inherently racist? Why do we have to point that out in 2021? The reason we have to point that out in 2021 is directly related to the problems that we're having otherwise, is that we're not teaching real history. And even when we try to teach real history, people go crazy and they are yelling about critical race theory.
Yeah.
So we don't know the history of voting suppression in America, where we have suppressed the right to vote. Many different communities, poor but particularly African American communities throughout American history, women, etc., over and over, all kinds of different kinds of voter suppression. So the question we have to ask is, why wouldn't you want someone to vote? Why wouldn't you want someone to vote? The only reason you wouldn't want someone to vote is if you fear that if they vote, they will vote against you.
Yeah.
So you suppress their vote in order to get them to vote against you, which is the least democratic thing you could possibly do in a democracy.
Yeah.
These are from the people who are shouting freedom and waving the American flag and singing the Star Spangled Banner and jumping up and down about how critical race theory is anti-American. No. Voter suppression is anti-American. Voter suppression is anti-American. So everything feels so disingenuous to me. So let me just start with the basic there. I mean, it's just like, this is crazy. This is crazy. Voter suppression efforts are anti-American, anti-democratic, and very much anti-Black.
Yeah.
Very, very much anti-Black. And are specifically connected to white backlash and the insurrection and Donald Trump's loss. Right? This is a concerted attempt by conservative politicians to make it less possible for Stacey Abrams and others to do what they did in Georgia, which is to turn a state blue that was red for the sake of the Black residents who live there. So first of all, it should be illegal. It should straight up be illegal and impossible to do. And hopefully the Supreme Court will shut this mess down. But this is another reason why I think we're in a very dangerous moment. Some of these voter suppression laws are upheld before the election. You're going to see some states that should be blue that are turning back red.
Yeah.
And you're going to see some mess happen again, like it happened in the midterms of Obama's first presidency.
Right.
And the whole Tea Party mess happened. And I just feel, so anyway, I think we have to hold voting rights and Nikole Hannah-Jones and CRT and the Olympics and all these things together as a whole and keep talking about them as a part of the same thing. Certainly we can get into the nuance of each, but we have to keep looking at it as a part of the moment that we're in, or we're going to miss what's happening around us.
Right. One final thing that I've been wrestling with regarding the voting rights is, what is the role of the white church, particularly the white progressive church, right? Because Black church has been really good at organizing around getting people registered, getting people to the polls. What is the role of a church like Myers Park Baptist, who does not have an issue necessarily with getting most of our people to the polls, but our responsibility to our neighbors to make sure they are having a fair advantage at getting the resources they need to understand who's running, to understand who they can vote for, not who to vote for, but who they can vote for. What is our role as a church, especially in this period where there's so much call for this separation of church and state, this depoliticizing the pulpit? Not that we do that. We don't care here. We do whatever we want. But there's still this movement towards that. What's our role?
Well, in the last election, our role was really about voter intimidation. We were a part of an effort that was run by the National Black Political Organization and Barbara Skinner, and then partnered with Sojourners and Jim Wallace to get us involved in an effort called Lawyers and Collars, where lawyers and clergy would show up at voting stations to make sure that there was not voter intimidation happening, because that's what we were mostly concerned about. But also there were some issues of access where people were turned away from polls. And some of our folks outside were able to tell them, no, you actually can vote. Go back in there. I'll go with you. And we're able to cite legal precedent as lawyers to tell the people at the polling stations who don't know shit that they need to let these folks vote. So I think we had a lot of support for that effort from our congregation. We had a number of lawyers who were involved. Ray Owens, Cindy Adcock, Kathy Thompson. I'm sure I'm forgetting some of the lawyers who are involved in that, but really a lot of support from the lawyers in our congregation and clergy who went out to these sites. So protecting, what we were doing was we were trying to shut down voter suppression, which is what intimidation is doing too, is to try to keep people from voting, to feel safe, to stop the turnout from being so high.
Yeah.
I think we'll probably need to expand our efforts in that, given what we've seen of the white backlash this year. I'm imagining that for us personally, our efforts at resisting and standing against voter suppression are going to have to get stronger.
Yeah.
However, what is the role of the white church in general is a broad question, because you and I have talked about before, the white church doesn't do politics the way the black church does.
Yeah.
If we were a black church, we could be doing all kinds of different things around the election, all kinds of different things around voting. If we were a black church, I might be running for office. Who knows what we're doing, right? But that's not who we are. And I'm not saying it's who we should be necessarily, but I do think we have to reckon with the changing, how our church is changing, and where I feel like we may be being called to be led in the fight for democracy in America. Listen, Baptists have always been on the front lines of the fight for democracy, because Baptists are organized around democratic principles, right? The church itself is democratically run and operated. Therefore, our passion for the free pulpit, what does George Heaton say? The free pulpit is the bedrock of a democracy. Freedom of speech is the bedrock of a democracy. And autonomy, congregational, the people having a vote, one person, one vote, which is how our church works, representation, right? These things that are keys as a part of democracy. And I think that we're not actively on the front lines of democracy right now the way we could be.
Yeah.
There's a lot to fight about, but that's one place where I see we could definitely grow in our efforts. And I wish the white church in America would see that, but of course it's so polarizing and so politicized everywhere.
Yeah. That's important work. And I look forward to diving deeper into that political conversation, and not just waiting for when there's a big election to talk about it, but to actually constantly working. I mean, we're seeing organizers, Latasha from Georgia, we're seeing her on the road. She is still organizing. The fight didn't end because we, got our little presidential victory or whatever in November. She's still organizing in the mid season. So I hope that we can continue that. I do want to make a slight correction. The intersex athlete's name is Castor, not Carter. I sometimes say Carter. Castor. But do look these people up, because it's important. I'm not telling you to boycott the Olympics, but if you happen to watch, God bless you.
A lot of people are going to be watching, but maybe if they do watch, the boycotts are one form of political resistance.
And they don't really work in capitalistic. It's very hard for them to actually work because it's not set up that way.
But still, people can do so out of principle, or boycott even particular sports within the Olympic. But in general, just to have a more informed vision of what we're participating in, what we're watching. The Olympics have also always been political. It's a reminder that there are again, just like the church has always been political, the Olympics is always political. I mean, think about Hitler watching Jesse Owens.
Yeah.
Think about what was the name of the athlete that raises his hand?
But I know you're talking about
the protest. Yeah. One of the very first, long before Kaepernick, there was that. Politics has always been a part of the Olympics. Politics has always been a part of sports.
And gentrification, colonialism has as well. I mean, most of the time they're going into these areas and, wiping the land clean to build a stadium, to build this. And now, we're seeing Japan declare states of emergency because they didn't want this to happen anyway. And now there's a COVID outbreak. So, so we're seeing how the Olympics, the organization has disregarded the fact that we're even in a pandemic to move forward with this. So there's a lot there. I just want people to be informed and to be thinking about all of these different facets. As always, thank you for listening and watching. If you like what you hear, feel free to go to our website and press the give button to support sacred justice and the work that we are doing at Myers Park Baptist Church. We really do enjoy
these podcasts. Take money and time to produce, and we would really appreciate your support so that we can keep doing them for you. And so if you could send a special donation in through the give button on our website, we'd really appreciate it.
Yes. Coming up next for the next 4 weeks, we are transitioning into our annual Pride Proud Theology series. We are going to have a couple of guests on, and I'm excited about that. This year, we're really centering transgender folks, and so we really want to uplift them. And so, please join us for the next 4 episodes.
See
All
ya.
right, next time. Friends, that was our episode this week. As always, please email your questions and your suggestions to Reverend Mia McLean at mmcclain@myersparkbaptist.org. Until next time, take care. This is Sacred Justice.